Silver Pines Station closed 40 years ago. At 4:19 every morning, a train still arrives. Lukas Meyer first heard about it from a timetable that should not have existed. He was a railway photographer who spent his weekends documenting abandoned branch lines before weather, vandalism, and redevelopment erased them completely. An envelope with no return address arrived at his apartment in Munich, containing a brittle station schedule, a platform diagram for Silver Pines, and one service handwritten in black ink beneath every cancelled departure. No train number, no destination, only a time. 4:19 a.m. Silver Pines had been shut down after a tunnel collapse in 1986. The line beyond the station had been torn out in sections. The signal cabin had no electricity. The village itself had thinned to a few boarded houses, a shuttered inn, and a church that rang late because no one lived close enough to correct the clock. Everything Lukas could verify suggested the same conclusion. No train had reached Silver Pines in decades. That was exactly why he drove there with 2 cameras, spare batteries, a digital recorder, and the kind of confidence that comes from expecting a hoax rather than a pattern. The first morning gave him one detail he could not explain, and nothing else. At 4:18, the dead platform lights came on in sequence. Not all at once, but one after another, as if an invisible station master had started a careful inspection. A whistle sounded from somewhere beyond the pine line. It carried the grainy weight of old steam instead of the flat electronic tone of a modern horn. Then the station clock above the ticket window twitched backward by 3 minutes, before settling again at 4:19. No train arrived, no tracks vibrated, no headlights appeared in the valley. Lukas filmed the lights, photographed the clock, and told himself the rest could still be wiring, weather, or a prank with a speaker hidden in the trees. He came back the next night because the first incident had been specific. Random fear usually becomes less exact when revisited. This became more exact. At 4:19 precisely, a black train rolled into the station in complete silence. No smoke drifted over the roof. No sparks jumped beneath the wheels. The cars simply emerged from the dark stretch where the rails ended, gliding into place as though the missing line still existed somewhere beneath the mist. Every window was lit. Every carriage was crowded. Men in war-era coats sat beside women in 70s dresses, and children wearing school uniforms from periods Lukas could only identify later, from archive photographs. None of them looked at the platform. No one stepped out. No one invited him aboard. That restraint frightened Lukas more than an immediate attack would have. The train seemed to be waiting for a decision it already knew he would make. He kept filming, zoomed in on the nearest carriage, and saw a conductor standing under a brass lamp at the far end. The man raised a punch tool, glanced at Lukas, and held out his other hand as if asking for a ticket. When Lukas checked his coat pocket, he found a stiff rectangle of gray card he had never seen before. On one side was stamped Silver Pines. On the other was a date, exactly 7 years in the future. He did not board that night. By morning the ticket was gone, but the footage remained. The platform lights were visible. So was the train. What the recording did not preserve consistently was the same thing from frame to frame. In one still image, the nearest carriage looked empty. In the next, every seat was occupied. The conductor appeared in a window where he had not been a second before. Timestamps on the file skipped from 4:19:07 to 4:19:07 again, repeating 4 seconds, with different images laid over them. The evidence proved Lukas had not imagined the event. It also proved documentation would not behave normally around it. He began researching Silver Pines instead of dismissing it. Old local newspapers described crashes, avalanches, and disappearances along the line, but a retired dispatcher gave him the first useful pattern. People who claimed to see the train always encountered it after surviving something that should have killed them. A mine cave-in, a flooded bridge, a winter pileup on the pass road. One man had walked away from a fire that trapped everyone else in his building. Another woman had been listed missing for 3 days after a hiking fall, then returned with frostbite and no memory of where she had sheltered. Each witness described the same arrival time. Each later vanished, often after reporting clocks stopping around them. The rule changed the story. Lukas had survived a derailment as a teenager when a freight wagon split the side of the regional train he was riding. 3 passengers in his carriage died. He had been dragged out through broken glass before the emergency crews reached the ravine. For years he treated that as luck, wrapped in survivor's guilt. At Silver Pines, luck began to look like an accounting error. On the 3rd night he boarded, he told himself he needed interior photographs before the story spread and turned the site into a vandalized legend. In truth, curiosity had already begun doing the danger's work for it. The air inside the carriage was warm and smelled of soot, wet wool and the faint medicinal sharpness of old waiting rooms. The passengers sat too still. Some looked injured. Some looked exhausted. A woman in a nurse's cape stared at her hands as if expecting blood to return to them. A boy in a school blazer watched Lucas with open pity. Beyond the windows, silver pines disappeared. The station was replaced by a burned forest under slow-falling ash, the trees black and upright like timber left standing after a controlled fire. The conductor came through at once. Up close he was not skeletal or theatrical. He looked like a working railway employee with tired eyes and skin too pale for the heat inside the carriage. He clicked the punch against his palm and asked, "Ticket, please." The gray card was back in Lucas's pocket. This time the printed date had not changed, but beneath it, in small block letters that had not been there before, was a phrase he recognized from the derailment inquiry report. Passenger remained unrecovered for 11 minutes. Lucas had never told anyone he remembered that line. He had read it once in a records office and wished for years that he had not. He handed the ticket over without letting go. "What is this train?" The conductor looked almost sympathetic. "A correction. That was when the child across the aisle spoke. He could not have been older than 10. His socks were wet. His hair was combed flat in the style of a school portrait from another era." He said it casually, the way one child might explain local rules to another. It takes the people death expected the first time. No one reacted to him. No one denied it. Lucas understood then that the worst part of the train was not that it wanted belief. It wanted participation. Every answer required a question. Every rule became binding only after someone tested it. He moved from carriage to carriage, taking photographs, because observation was the only action that still felt like his own. The deeper he went, the more personal the passenger list became. A maintenance worker with a shattered jaw wore the logo of the rail company involved in Lucas's teenage accident. An elderly couple sat beneath a luggage rack where a suitcase tab carried the name of the mountain pass, where his car had spun through black ice 3 winters earlier. In the final carriage, he found a man his own age, with a line of dried blood across his temple, and half his face shadowed by broken safety glass. Lucas realized with cold certainty that he was looking at the version of himself that had not been dragged from the derailment in time. He backed away, and the train responded immediately. The lights dimmed, the whistle sounded, not outside now, but through the carriage walls themselves. All along the train, railway clocks fixed above compartment doors snapped to 4:19. Then another voice reached him from the vestibule ahead. Lucas, it was his mother's voice. She had been alive, healthy and asleep in her apartment 200 kilometers away. That made the call worse, not better. The voice carried exactly the right mixture of concern and impatience. The tone she used when he had wandered too far from a platform edge as a child. "You got on the wrong train. Come forward, hurry." He nearly obeyed. That was the first moment he understood how little the phenomenon needed in order to steer a human decision. It did not need claws, speed, or force. It only needed one familiar thing, placed exactly where panic wanted relief. The child in the school blazer shook his head once. "If it sounds like home, it's not for you." That warning gave Lukas the only workable plan he found all night. He had been photographing reflections in the carriage windows and noticed one inconsistency. Every pane reflected the interior, except the last door at the rear of the train. In photographs, it showed Silver Pine Station exactly as it should have looked in reality, empty and frost-covered, with the platform edge visible and the dead clock above the ticket windows stopped at 4:16. The train could imitate voices, histories, and destinations. It could not maintain a lie where its own image should have appeared. So Lucas waited for the next curve, counted the seconds between the rail clatter and the whistle, and moved to the rear platform. The conductor called after him. Their faces were not monstrous. That would have been simpler. They looked angry, exhausted, and desperate in the way the living do when they see someone refuse a burden that might be passed on. The rear door opened onto the reflected station. Lucas jumped. He hit frozen gravel and rolled hard enough to tear his coat and split his lip. Dawn was beginning to thin the trees over the real platform. No train stood beside him. No lights were on. The station was empty except for his dropped camera, lying 3 meters away, still recording. For several seconds he believed he had won, simply because ordinary pain had returned. Then he checked the memory card. Most of the interior shots were gone. The file directory showed they had been taken, but the images themselves had been replaced by blank frames marked with future timestamps. Only one photograph remained intact. It showed Lucas seated in the middle carriage, staring directly at the lens, while another Lucas stood in the aisle, holding the camera. He left Silver Pines before full daylight, and did everything a rational person should do afterward. He duplicated the files. He interviewed the retired dispatcher again. He submitted the photographs to forensic analysts. He returned to the derailment archive and confirmed that several documents had changed wording since his last visit, just enough to make his own survival sound less certain, as though the official version had begun renegotiating the outcome. The haunting, if that was what it was, never repeated in the same theatrical way. It became quieter and more precise. Railway clocks stopped whenever Lukas entered a station. Departure boards flickered to 4:19 for a single frame and reset before anyone else noticed. Once, on a commuter platform in Augsburg, he heard a conductor moving down the empty track behind him, checking tickets with a click that matched the punch tool from Silver Pines. When he turned, there was nothing there except the smell of hot metal and rain. Years passed. Lukas stopped photographing abandoned lines. He moved apartments twice. He kept every surviving record in a locked cabinet and visited no station unless work forced him to. The pattern seemed to settle into distance rather than disappearance, which may have been the cruelest stage of all. It trained him to live as if caution could count as escape. Then a new envelope arrived. Inside was the same brittle timetable, the same platform diagram, the same handwritten service at 4:19 a.m., but this time there was one additional line beneath the departure. Not destination, not delay notice, a roster entry. Passenger, Lukas Meyer. Conductor, Lukas Meyer. Nothing else came with it. No threat, no instruction. Only proof that the train had not lost interest, and that whatever happened at Silver Pines had not ended with him leaving the platform. The final possibility is the reason the story still spreads among railway workers and mountain towns. If the train only collected the people death missed, the pattern would be terrible but limited. The worst explanation is that it studies the survivors long enough to make them part of the schedule. Lukas has not reached the printed date yet, but every morning at 4:19, he wakes to the sound of a whistle outside his building, and a conductor walking slowly down his hallway, asking in a calm voice for tickets.